I watched the HOA board president's face turn 3 shades of red when I told her my wood stove was for my family only. But I had no idea that decision would spark the most satisfying winter of my entire life. My name is Kenneth Parker, and I bought my house in Riverside Meadows, a planned community outside Boulder, Colorado, back in 2019. The place seemed perfect at first. Well-maintained streets, decent neighbors, and a reasonable HOA that mostly stayed out of everyone's business. That all changed when Brenda Morrison got elected as the new board president in early 2024. Brenda was the textbook definition of a Karen, complete with the asymmetrical blonde bob, designer athleisure wear, and an attitude that suggested the world owed her constant validation. I'm a carpenter by trade, and I'd done well for myself over the years. My house sat on a corner lot, slightly larger than most properties in the neighborhood, with enough space for a decent workshop in the garage. When I moved in, I noticed the house had an old fireplace that hadn't been used in years. The previous owners had it closed off, but the chimney was still intact. Last fall, with energy prices climbing and winter approaching, I decided to install a proper wood-burning stove. Not one of those cheap tin boxes, but a high-quality cast iron joddle that could heat my entire 2,000-square-foot house efficiently. The installation took 3 weeks. I hired certified professionals, got all the necessary permits from Boulder County, had the chimney inspected and relined, and made sure everything was up to code. The stove sat in my living room like a beautiful piece of functional art, with soapstone panels that radiated heat long after the fire died down. I spent September and October stockpiling firewood, cutting and splitting cords from a local tree service that gave me diseased trees they had to remove anyway. By November 2025, I had nearly 4 cords of seasoned oak, maple, and pine neatly stacked in a covered area behind my house. The first cold snap hit Boulder in mid-November. Temperatures dropped to 15 degrees at night, and I fired up my wood stove for the first time. The thing worked like a dream. My gas furnace barely kicked on, and my house stayed toasty warm at a fraction of the cost. I'd open my front door in the morning to grab the newspaper, and the rush of cold air felt almost refreshing against the 72-degree warmth inside. That's when Brenda first noticed. She lived 3 houses down in a 2-story colonial that she'd painted an aggressive shade of beige. I was loading wood into my arms from the stack one Saturday morning when she appeared at the edge of my driveway, wrapped in a puffy white jacket that made her look like a designer marshmallow. "Kenneth," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I couldn't help but notice you've been burning wood." I straightened up, balancing 5 split logs in my arms. "Morning, Brenda. Yeah, just installed a wood stove. Works great." Her smile tightened. "I see. You know, the HOA has regulations about outdoor burning." "This isn't outdoor burning," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "It's a certified indoor wood stove, fully permitted and inspected, all legal." She took a few steps closer, her designer boots crunching on the light dusting of snow. "Still, the smoke from your chimney has been quite noticeable. Some neighbors have complained about the smell." "Which neighbors?" I asked, genuinely curious. My nearest neighbor, Ed, had actually complimented me on the setup and asked for my installer's contact information. Brenda waved her hand vaguely. "Several residents." "The point is, we're a community, Kenneth. We need to think about everyone's comfort." "My stove burns clean," I said. "Modern EPA-certified appliances produce minimal smoke when operated correctly. I'm burning seasoned hardwood at the right temperatures. There shouldn't be much visible smoke at all." Her expression soured. "Nevertheless, I'll be bringing this up at the next board meeting. We may need to implement new guidelines." She walked away before I could respond, her boots clicking against the pavement with irritating precision. I shook my head and carried my wood inside. The HOA covenants I'd signed when buying the house said nothing about wood stoves or fireplaces. They couldn't retroactively ban something that was legal and already installed. The board meeting happened 2 weeks later, on December 3rd. I didn't usually attend these things. They were typically boring discussions about landscaping contracts and mailbox colors, but Brenda had sent a community-wide email mentioning important discussions regarding heating systems and air quality. I figured I should show up. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building near the neighborhood entrance that doubled as a gym and event space. About 20 residents showed up, which was actually a decent turnout. Brenda sat at a folding table at the front with the other 4 board members: Dale Harrison, the vice president, Stephanie Chen, the treasurer, Tom Whitfield, the secretary, and Patricia Evans, a member at large. Brenda called the meeting to order and went through the usual tedious business. Then she got to what she called new concerns. "It has come to the board's attention," she began, projecting her voice like she was addressing a stadium, "that at least one resident has installed a wood-burning heating appliance that is producing smoke and odors that affect the community's air quality and property values." I raised my hand. "That would be me, and I'd like to address those claims." Brenda's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Mr. Parker, please." I stood up, turning slightly so I could address both the board and the other residents. "I installed an EPA-certified wood stove in my home this fall. It's fully permitted through Boulder County, professionally installed, and meets or exceeds all safety and emissions standards. Modern wood stoves burn extremely clean when operated properly, which mine is. I'd welcome anyone to come inspect it." An older gentleman I recognized as Frank, who lived near the neighborhood entrance, spoke up. "I haven't noticed any smoke problems. Are we sure there's actually an issue?" Brenda's face flushed. "Multiple residents have complained privately." "Then maybe they should speak up publicly," I said. "Because I'd like to know specifically what the problem is so I can address it, if there actually is one." Silence. Nobody raised their hand or voiced a complaint. Brenda cleared her throat. "Regardless, the board is considering an amendment to our covenants that would regulate solid fuel-burning appliances to maintain our community standards. You can't retroactively ban something that's already legally installed and compliant with all existing rules," I said. "I checked the covenants thoroughly before I did this. There's nothing prohibiting wood stoves." Dale, the vice president, a mild-mannered accountant who usually just nodded along with whatever Brenda said, actually spoke up. "Kenneth's right. We'd need a vote of the full community to change the covenants, and even then, we couldn't force him to remove something that was legal when installed." Brenda shot Dale a look that could have melted steel. "Then perhaps we need to discuss community cooperation and being good neighbors." "I am being a good neighbor," I replied. "I'm heating my home efficiently and legally. If someone has a specific, legitimate complaint, I'm happy to discuss it, but vague accusations don't give me anything to work with." The meeting moved on, but I could feel Brenda's anger radiating from the front table. After it adjourned, several neighbors came up to me and quietly expressed support. 2 others asked about my setup because they were interested in doing something similar. Brenda left quickly, her heels clicking sharply against the clubhouse floor. December rolled along and temperatures kept dropping. Colorado winters can be brutal, and this one was shaping up to be particularly harsh. The weather reports predicted an extended cold spell with temperatures potentially hitting below 0. I kept my wood stove burning steady, my house stayed warm, and my natural gas bill remained pleasantly low. Then, on December 18th, I found a formal letter in my mailbox. It was from the HOA board, signed by Brenda, demanding that I limit use of solid fuel heating appliances to emergency situations only, and take immediate steps to minimize smoke and odor impact on neighboring properties. The letter threatened fines of $100 per day for noncompliance, starting December 26th. I read the letter twice, feeling my blood pressure rise. This was complete garbage. They had no authority to demand this, and they definitely couldn't levy fines for something that wasn't actually a covenant violation. I took photos of the letter and called my real estate attorney, a sharp woman named Rachel, who'd handled my house closing. "They can't do this," Rachel confirmed after I emailed her the letter. "Your wood stove is legal, permitted, and doesn't violate any existing covenants. If they try to fine you, don't pay. We'll fight it, and honestly, Kenneth, you might have grounds for a harassment claim if this continues." "I just want to heat my house in peace," I said. "Then keep doing exactly what you're doing. Document everything. If they escalate, we'll shut it down legally." I felt better after talking to Rachel, but I also felt angry. I'd done everything right, followed every rule, and now Brenda was trying to bully me because she didn't like something she had no actual authority over. On December 20th, Brenda showed up at my door. It was early evening, already dark, and I had a nice fire going. The stove glowed warmly through its glass door, and the house smelled like wood smoke and the beef stew I had simmering on the stove. I opened the door to find her standing on my porch with another woman I didn't recognize. "Kenneth," Brenda said, not bothering with pleasantries. "This is Margaret Sutton. She lives 4 houses down, and your smoke has been aggravating her asthma." Margaret looked uncomfortable, like she'd rather be anywhere else. She was maybe 60, wearing a thick coat and a worried expression. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, addressing Margaret directly. "But I have to tell you, my stove produces minimal smoke. Modern EPA-certified stoves burn very clean. If you're experiencing breathing problems, it might be from something else, or possibly from someone burning wood improperly in a fireplace." "See," Margaret said, turning to Brenda. "I told you I wasn't sure it was his. The smoke is clearly visible from his chimney," Brenda interrupted. "We can all see it. Water vapor is visible," I said. "When hot exhaust meets cold air, you get condensation. That's not smoke, that's steam. Actual smoke from a properly burning fire is almost invisible." Brenda's face hardened. "You received the board's letter. We expect compliance." "I received a letter that has no legal basis," I replied. "I consulted with my attorney. If you attempt to fine me, I'll fight it and I'll win. I'm not violating any rules, covenants, or laws." "This is about being a decent member of this community," Brenda snapped. "We're asking you to cooperate." "You're demanding I stop using a legal heating appliance in my own home," I said, my patience wearing thin. "That's not reasonable, and I'm not doing it." Margaret looked even more uncomfortable. "Maybe we should just go, Brenda," but Brenda wasn't done. "Fine. Since you won't be reasonable, let me make another proposal. Several residents, myself included, are concerned about heating costs this winter. If you insist on using your wood stove, the community-minded thing to do would be to share it. Open your home to neighbors who need supplemental heat during particularly cold days." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You want me to open my house to random neighbors so they can use my heating system? Are you serious?" "I'm completely serious. You have a resource that could benefit the community." "It's my private property and my private heating system," I said. "Nobody shares their furnace or electric heat with the neighborhood. This is absurd." "So you refuse to help your neighbors?" Brenda's voice rose. That tells us everything we need to know about what kind of person you are, Kenneth. What it tells you, I said coldly, is that I understand property rights and boundaries. Now, if you'll excuse me, my dinner's getting cold. I closed the door before Brenda could respond. Through the window, I watched her stalk back down my driveway, poor Margaret trailing behind her looking mortified. The next day, December 21st, I received an email from the HOA board announcing an emergency community meeting for December 23rd to discuss heating equity and community resource sharing. The email was full of flowery language about neighbors helping neighbors and pulling together during difficult times. It made my wood stove sound like a public utility that I was selfishly hoarding. I forwarded it to Rachel, who called me back within an hour. "This is getting into potential harassment territory," she said. "They're targeting you specifically and trying to create community pressure to force you into compliance with something they have no authority to demand. What should I do?" "Go to the meeting if you want, but don't let them bully you. You're doing nothing wrong. If this continues, we can send them a cease and desist letter or even file a complaint." The emergency meeting had a better turnout than the regular one, probably 40 residents crammed into the clubhouse. Word had apparently spread about the wood stove controversy, and people were curious. I showed up a few minutes early and took a seat in the back. Brenda started the meeting by painting a picture of a harsh winter ahead, rising heating costs, and the need for community solidarity. Then she brought up my wood stove, though she carefully avoided using my name at first. "We have a resident who has installed a heating system that could provide supplemental warmth to multiple households," she said. "However, this resident has refused to share this resource with neighbors in need. I believe this goes against the spirit of community that we've built here in Riverside Meadows." A woman I didn't recognize raised her hand. "Are you talking about Kenneth Parker's wood stove? So much for anonymity." "I'm discussing community resources generally," Brenda said primly. "It's my wood stove," I called out from the back. "And let me be clear about what's being asked here. Brenda wants me to open my private home and share my heating system with whoever wants to use it. That's not a reasonable request." Ed, my next-door neighbor, spoke up. "I think Kenneth's being unfairly targeted here. He installed a legal heating system in his own home. Nobody's asking me to share my furnace." "A furnace doesn't use a renewable resource," Brenda countered. "Wood can be shared. Heat from wood can be shared. This is about community spirit." "This is about property rights," I said, standing up. "I bought and split 4 cords of wood. I installed and maintain my stove. I'm heating my home efficiently. None of that obligates me to open my house to the neighborhood." Frank, the older gentleman from the previous meeting, nodded. "The kid's right, Brenda. You can't force someone to share their home. This is America, not a commune." Brenda's face went red. "Fine. Then let the record show that Kenneth Parker refuses to help his neighbors during a crisis." "There is no crisis," I said. "Everyone's furnace works. Mine does too. I just also have a wood stove that I'm using to supplement and save money. That's not a community resource. It's my personal property." The meeting devolved into arguments after that, with about half the room supporting me and the other half either supporting Brenda or staying quiet. Eventually, Brenda adjourned the meeting without any resolution, looking furious. Christmas came and went. I spent it with my sister's family in Denver, driving down on Christmas Eve and returning on the 26th. My house was cold when I got back, but I had the stove roaring within an hour, heat pouring into every room. That evening, December 26th, the temperature dropped to 5 degrees. The weather forecast predicted even colder temperatures over the next week, with a possibility of hitting 10 below zero by New Year's Eve. I loaded up my stove, damped it down for a long overnight burn, and went to bed comfortable and warm. I woke up around 2 in the morning to a strange sound outside. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it clearly. Someone shouting. I got out of bed, pulled on a sweatshirt, and looked out my bedroom window. The street was dark except for a few streetlights, but I could see people standing outside several houses, all bundled up and looking confused. More shouts echoed through the night. Something was wrong. I went downstairs and opened my front door. The cold hit me like a physical force, but my house was still warm from the stove. Ed was standing in his driveway talking on his phone. "Ed," I called out. "What's going on?" He walked over, his breath coming out in huge white clouds. "Power's out, whole neighborhood." "But it's worse than that, the gas is out too." "What do you mean the gas is out?" "Natural gas. No flow. Phone company's recorded message says there's an emergency shutoff affecting our whole development. Something about a main line break." My stomach dropped. "How long until it's fixed?" "Message didn't say. Could be hours, could be days." Ed hugged himself against the cold. "I've got some electric space heaters, but without power I'm screwed. House is already down to 58 degrees. You've got a fireplace, right?" "Yeah, but no wood. Haven't used it in years." "I was going to ask about buying some from you, actually, after seeing how well your setup works." Other neighbors were emerging from their houses now, everyone confused and cold. I saw Brenda 3 houses down, wrapped in a robe and coat, yelling at someone on her phone. "Come on," I told Ed. "Bring your wife. You can warm up in my house while we figure this out." Ed's expression showed pure relief. "You sure?" "Of course. It's freezing out here." Ed rushed back to his house and returned a few minutes later with his wife, Susan. They practically fell through my front door, gasping at the warmth inside. My living room was a comfortable 70 degrees, the wood stove radiating heat like a miniature sun. "Oh my God," Susan said, pulling off her coat. "Kenneth, this is incredible." "Just a good wood stove and some planning," I said. "Let me make some coffee." My gas stove didn't work, obviously, but I had a camping stove with propane canisters in my emergency supplies. I set it up on the kitchen counter and got water heating for coffee. While it warmed, I stepped outside to see what else was happening. The neighborhood was in chaos. People stood in driveways and yards, everyone talking at once. Temperatures were still dropping. I heard someone say it was down to 3 degrees now. Houses were going to get dangerously cold, dangerously fast. That's when I saw Brenda marching up my driveway. "Kenneth," she shouted, her voice carrying across the frozen air. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms and waited as she approached, trailed by Dale and Patricia from the HOA board. "We have a community emergency," Brenda announced. "Your wood stove is the only reliable heat source in the neighborhood. We need you to open your home." "Ed and Susan are already inside," I said. "They're my next-door neighbors. I mean everyone," Brenda snapped. "We need to establish this as a warming center until power and gas are restored." "How many people live in this development?" I asked. 300, 400. You want to cram them all in my 2,000 square foot house." "Obviously not everyone at once," Dale interjected, trying to be reasonable. "But we could set up shifts. People could come warm up, especially the elderly and families with children." "My house is not a public facility," I said. "I'm sorry about the emergency, but I'm not equipped to handle dozens of strangers coming through." Brenda stepped closer, her face twisted with anger. "This is exactly what I warned everyone about. You're selfish and unwilling to help your community." "I'm helping my actual neighbors," I replied. "Ed and Susan are welcome to stay as long as they need, but I'm not turning my home into a homeless shelter. People could freeze to death," Brenda shouted. Then they should go to an actual warming center, I said. The city of Boulder has emergency shelters. The rec center on Canyon Boulevard is open 24/7 during cold snaps. That's 30 minutes away. Then people better get driving before the roads get worse. I turned back toward my house. I'm going inside. Ed and Susan are welcome to stay. Everyone else needs to make other arrangements. You'll regret this, Brenda called after me. The board won't forget this refusal to cooperate. I closed my door on her threats and went back to making coffee. Ed and Susan were sitting close to the wood stove, holding their hands out to the warmth. That sounded heated, Ed said with a weak smile. Brenda wants me to turn my house into a community warming center, I explained. Apparently, I'm supposed to host the entire neighborhood. Susan shook her head. That's crazy. This is your home. That's what I told her. I poured 3 cups of coffee and brought them over. You two are welcome to stay here as long as you need. I've got sleeping bags and extra blankets. We'll make it work. We really appreciate this, Ed said. I'll pay you for the wood and whatever else we use. Don't worry about it. We're neighbors. This is different from what Brenda's demanding. We spent the rest of the early morning hours staying warm and monitoring the situation. Ed had a battery-powered radio, and we listened to news updates. The power outage affected about 5,000 customers across 3 developments, including ours. The natural gas shutoff was due to an emergency main line break caused by the extreme cold. Contracted metal had cracked a major pipe. Repairs were underway, but the utility company estimated it would take at least 3 days to fix and restore service safely. 3 days. In below-zero temperatures. This was going to be bad by dawn. The temperature had dropped to -2 degrees. My house remained warm, though I was going through wood faster than usual trying to maintain comfortable temperatures. Ed helped me carry in more logs from my outdoor stack. We were working on our second load when a Boulder police cruiser pulled into my driveway. A young officer stepped out bundled in a heavy coat. "Morning. I'm Officer Jake Martinez. Are you Kenneth Parker?" "That's me," I said, wondering what this was about. "I've had a complaint that you're refusing to provide emergency shelter to neighbors during a power outage." "Can you tell me your side?" I explained the situation, about the HOA conflict over my wood stove, Brenda's demands that I share it, and my refusal to turn my home into a public warming center. Officer Martinez listened carefully, taking occasional notes. "So you do have neighbors sheltering with you currently?" he asked. "Ed and Susan from next door. They're welcome to stay as long as needed. And you're not refusing to help people entirely, you just don't want to open your home to dozens of strangers." "Exactly. I'm one person with a wood stove, not a public facility. The city has actual warming centers with staff, supplies, and space." Officer Martinez nodded slowly. "Sir, I understand the complaint, but you're not legally required to open your home to anyone. The city does have warming centers available, and we've been directing people to those facilities. As long as you're not doing anything illegal, which you're not, this is between you and your HOA." "Brenda's going to love hearing that," I muttered. The officer smiled slightly. "HOA disputes are civil matters. If they try to fine you or take action, that's something you'd handle through the courts. But letting people freeze because you won't open your private home, that's not a crime, and honestly, it's not reasonable to expect one person to shelter an entire neighborhood." He left after getting my contact information for his report. I felt vindicated but also worried. Brenda wasn't going to let this go. Throughout the day, neighbors kept coming by. Some were genuinely asking if they could warm up for a bit. Others were demanding I let them in, their entitlement showing through their chattering teeth. I let in Mrs. Henderson, an 80-year-old widow who lived alone 2 houses down. She was legitimately at risk in the cold, and I couldn't say no. I also allowed the Yamamoto family with their 2 small kids. Their 6-month-old baby needed to stay warm, and again, I couldn't refuse. But I turned away plenty of others, especially those who came with Brenda's attitude of entitlement. One man actually tried to push past me when I opened the door, shouting about community obligation. Ed helped me block him until he left, cursing the whole way. By evening, my house had become a genuine refuge. Ed and Susan, Mrs. Henderson, the Yamamoto family with parents David and Lisa and their 2 kids, we were packed in but managing. I'd set up sleeping areas in the living room and den, everyone clustered near the wood stove. It felt like camping indoors, crowded and a bit chaotic, but we were warm and safe. I was going through wood fast now, burning through almost a cord a day keeping the house warm for 8 extra people. But I had enough. I'd prepared for this, maybe not this exact scenario, but for a harsh winter where I'd rely heavily on my stove. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood was suffering. I heard through Ed's radio that several families had already left for warming centers in Boulder, or were staying with relatives elsewhere. The temperature dropped to -8 degrees overnight, and houses without heat became dangerously cold. I learned later that 3 houses had frozen pipes burst, causing thousands of dollars in damage. On December 28th, 48 hours into the crisis, things escalated. I was outside splitting more wood when I heard shouting from Brenda's house. I looked over to see her and about 15 other residents marching toward my property. They looked angry, desperate, and cold. My gut told me this was about to get ugly. "Kenneth Parker," Brenda shouted as they reached my driveway. "We're done asking nicely. You're going to open your home to this community right now." I set down my axe and faced them. "Brenda, I've got 8 people staying here already. My house is full." "You've got room for more," she insisted. Several people behind her nodded angrily. "We're freezing. Our houses are down to 30 degrees inside. You have heat and you're going to share it." "Go to a warming center," I said. "The city has facilities specifically for this. We shouldn't have to leave our neighborhood." A man I didn't know yelled. "You have what we need right here." "My private property is not a public resource," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my rising anger. "I'm sorry you're cold, but you don't have a right to my house." Brenda's face contorted with rage. "Fine. You want to play it that way." "Patricia, Dale, as members of the HOA board, I'm declaring an emergency use of community resources. We're authorized to access Kenneth's property for the safety of residents." "You absolutely are not," I said, my hands balling into fists. "You have no legal authority to enter my home." "Community covenants allow for emergency measures," Brenda insisted. She started walking toward my front door. Several others followed her. I moved to block the door. "Stop right there. You're trespassing." "We're exercising community rights during an emergency." Brenda tried to push past me. I stood my ground and she stumbled back. The crowd behind her surged forward angrily. This was getting out of control fast. "Everyone stop." Ed's voice rang out from behind me. He'd come outside along with David Yamamoto. "Brenda, you're about to commit a crime. Breaking into Kenneth's house is trespassing and possibly burglary." "Back off. He's hoarding heat while people freeze," someone shouted. "He's heating his own home with his own resources," Ed shot back. "None of you are entitled to it." The standoff lasted several tense seconds. Then Brenda pulled out her phone. "Fine. I'm calling the police. We'll see what they say about your refusal to provide emergency assistance." "Go ahead," I said. "I've already talked to them. They agreed I'm not required to open my home. She called anyway, and we all stood in the freezing cold waiting for the police to arrive. The crowd didn't leave, huddling together on my driveway and front yard like an angry mob. I stayed by my door, Ed and David flanking me. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. 20 minutes later, 2 Boulder police cruisers arrived. Officer Martinez stepped out of one, along with another officer I didn't recognize. A sergeant emerged from the second car, an older woman with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. "What's going on here?" The sergeant asked, her voice carrying authority. Everyone started talking at once. The sergeant held up her hand. "One at a time." "Madam, you called this in." Brenda stepped forward. "Yes, Sergeant, I'm Brenda Morrison, president of the Riverside Meadows HOA. This man is refusing to provide emergency shelter during a life-threatening cold snap. He has the only working heat source in our neighborhood." The sergeant looked at me. "Mr. Parker, we spoke before." "Yes, madam," I said, recognizing her from Officer Martinez's earlier visit. "I currently have 8 people staying in my home, including an elderly woman and a family with small children. I've made room for those most at risk, but I can't house the entire neighborhood and I'm not legally required to." "He has space," Brenda insisted. "He's being selfish." "Madam," the sergeant said, her tone hardening, "Mr. Parker is correct. He's not legally obligated to provide shelter to anyone. The fact that he's already housing 8 people shows he's being more than reasonable. But people are suffering." Another woman cried out. "And the city has warming centers open specifically for this emergency," the sergeant replied. "Have any of you actually gone to those facilities?" Silence. "I didn't think so," the sergeant continued. "Let me be clear about something. Mr. Parker's home is his private property. You have no right to enter it without his permission. If you attempt to force entry, you will be arrested for trespassing at minimum, potentially burglary if you succeed in entering. The HOA has no authority to override property rights, regardless of what your covenants say. This is an emergency." Brenda protested. "Yes, it is, and emergency services are available. What this is not is an excuse to violate someone's property rights." The sergeant turned to the crowd. "I strongly suggest all of you either go to an official warming center or make other arrangements. Standing on Mr. Parker's property demanding he let you in is not acceptable. Disperse now, or I'll start citing people for trespassing." The crowd grumbled but began to break up. Most people wandered back toward their houses, shooting me angry looks. Brenda stood her ground for a moment longer, her face purple with rage and cold. "This isn't over," she hissed at me. "The board will be taking action." "Madam," Officer Martinez said warningly, "that sounds like a threat." Brenda spun on her heel and stalked away, Dale and Patricia trailing behind her. The sergeant watched them go, then turned back to me. "Mr. Parker, you might want to document everything that's happening here. If your HOA tries to retaliate, you'll want evidence." "I've been documenting since the beginning," I assured her. "My attorney's already involved." "Good. Stay safe and stay warm. If anyone tries to force entry or threatens you, call 911 immediately." The officers left, and I went back inside with Ed and David. My hands were shaking from adrenaline. That had come way too close to turning violent. The rest of December 28th passed tensely. I kept watching out my windows, half expecting another mob to show up. But the neighborhood stayed quiet, most houses dark as people either hunkered down or left for warming centers. My houseguests and I settled into an uneasy routine. David helped me manage the wood stove while Lisa cared for the kids. Mrs. Henderson, despite her age, insisted on helping Susan prepare meals using my camping stove and limited supplies. We rationed food carefully, not knowing how long this would last. I had a decent stockpile of canned goods and dried food, but 8 extra mouths went through supplies fast. That night, December 29th, the temperature hit -12 degrees. My house remained a steady 68 degrees, comfortable but not wasteful. We'd all settled in for the night when I heard something outside. A car door. Voices. I got up and looked out the front window carefully, staying back from the glass. 3 cars were parked on the street in front of Brenda's house. Several people were loading items into them, suitcases and bags. It looked like they were leaving. The next morning, I confirmed it. Brenda's house was dark, and her car was gone. Word spread through the remaining neighbors that she'd packed up and gone to her mother's house in Denver. So much for community solidarity. The power and gas came back on the afternoon of December 30th, exactly 3 days after it went out. The relief throughout the neighborhood was palpable. People emerged from their houses, celebrating. My house guests began preparing to go home, grateful but clearly ready for their own space. Mrs. Henderson hugged me before she left. "You saved my life, young man. Don't let those fools tell you otherwise." The Yamamoto family insisted on giving me $500 for wood and hospitality, despite my protests. Ed and Susan brought over a home-cooked dinner that night as thanks, but the ordeal wasn't over. On January 2nd, I received a formal letter from the HOA. It was a notice of fines totaling $5,000 for unauthorized assembly of non-residents on property, creating a public nuisance, failing to cooperate during a community emergency, and conduct unbecoming of a community member. I called Rachel immediately. "They're flailing," she said after reading the letter I'd emailed her. "None of these charges have any basis. I'll draft a response denying everything and threatening legal action if they pursue this. Can they actually fine me for this stuff? They can try, but it won't hold up. You didn't violate any covenants. If anything, they're the ones who violated your rights by attempting to force entry to your property. We might actually have a case against the HOA itself." Rachel sent her response on January 5th. It was 3 pages of legal language that basically said the HOA could take their fines and shove them where the sun doesn't shine. She also included a thinly veiled threat that if they continued this harassment, I would pursue legal action for violation of my property rights, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. 2 days later, I got a call from Dale, the HOA vice president. "Kenneth, it's Dale Harrison. Can we talk?" "About what?" "About everything that happened. Look, I want to apologize. Things got out of hand and you were treated unfairly." I was surprised. "Go on." "The rest of the board and I have been talking. Brenda Way overstepped her authority. She let the power situation turn into a personal vendetta against you. That wasn't right." "What prompted this sudden realization?" Dale sighed. "Honestly, several residents have threatened to sue the HOA over what happened. Ed compiled witness statements about Brenda trying to force entry to your property. We've talked to a lawyer, and we're in trouble. The HOA could face serious legal liability. So this apology is about covering your asses." "Partly," Dale admitted. "But also, I genuinely think you were treated badly. You helped people. You weren't required to, but you did. And Brenda tried to demonize you for not doing even more. That wasn't fair." "What about the fines?" "Rescinded. Completely voided. You won't hear anything more about them." "And Brenda?" "She's stepping down as board president. Actually, she's leaving the board entirely. There's going to be a special election for her position. Honestly, Kenneth, a lot of people are angry at how she handled everything." I felt a wave of satisfaction. Good. She was a terrible board president. "Yeah," Dale agreed quietly. "Look, I know this doesn't fix everything, but I wanted you to know the board acknowledges we were wrong. If there's anything we can do to make it right, let me know." After we hung up, I sat in my living room staring at my wood stove. The cast iron radiated gentle heat, the fire inside crackling softly. This whole situation had been insane, but I'd stood my ground and won. Over the following weeks, things slowly returned to normal in Riverside Meadows. Brenda's house went up for sale in late January. I heard she'd moved permanently to Denver, unable to face the neighborhood after everything that happened. Several other residents who'd been part of her angry mob also left, either embarrassed or still bitter about the whole situation. The special election for HOA board president happened in early February. Frank, the older gentleman who defended me during the meetings, won by a landslide. One of his first acts was to issue a formal community statement acknowledging that the previous board had overstepped its authority and reaffirming that all residents had full property rights regardless of HOA membership. But the legal saga wasn't quite finished. In mid-February, I got a call from a Boulder County detective named Sarah Chen. She wanted to meet with me about the December incident. My stomach dropped, worried that somehow I was in trouble, but her tone was professional and not accusatory. Detective Chen came to my house the next day. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Parker, I'm investigating several complaints related to the events of December 28th. Specifically, the attempted forced entry to your property by HOA board members and other residents." "I was told that was a civil matter," I said cautiously. "The property dispute is civil," she agreed. "But attempted breaking and entering, trespassing, and threatening behavior are criminal matters. We've received statements from several witnesses, including your neighbors Ed and Susan, who say that Brenda Morrison and others attempted to physically force their way into your home against your will." "That's accurate," I confirmed. "I have video footage too, if that helps." Her eyebrows rose. "You have video?" I'd forgotten about my Ring doorbell, which had captured everything. I pulled up the footage on my phone and showed it to Detective Chen. The video clearly showed Brenda declaring she had authority to enter my home, then trying to push past me when I blocked the door. It showed the crowd surging forward aggressively. It was damning evidence. "I'm going to need a copy of this," Detective Chen said. "Mr. Parker, would you be willing to press charges?" I thought about it carefully. Part of me just wanted to move on. But another part, the part that was still angry about being harassed and threatened, wanted accountability. What would the charges be? Trespassing at minimum. Possibly attempted burglary, since there was an attempt to enter your home to take property, in this case, your heat and resources. Maybe criminal threatening, depending on witness testimony about statements made. Who would be charged? Primarily Brenda Morrison as the ringleader. Possibly one or two others who actively participated in trying to force entry. People who were just standing there wouldn't be charged. I made my decision. Yes, I'll press charges. What she did was wrong and she needs to face consequences. I understand. I'll need a formal statement from you and we'll proceed from there. I gave my statement that afternoon at the Boulder police station. Over the next several weeks, Detective Chen conducted her investigation. She interviewed multiple witnesses, reviewed the Ring camera footage, and built a case. In late March, Brenda Morrison was formally charged with criminal trespassing and attempted burglary. Dale Harrison and two other residents who'd actively tried to force entry were charged with trespassing. The charges were misdemeanors, not felonies, but they were serious nonetheless. The case moved through the court system slowly. Brenda hired a lawyer who tried to argue that the emergency situation justified her actions, but the district attorney's office wasn't buying it. Private property rights don't evaporate during an emergency, and there were legal alternatives available, namely the city warming centers. In June, unable to fight the clear video evidence and multiple witness statements, Brenda accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to criminal trespassing, paid a fine of $1,000, and was sentenced to 1 year of probation and 100 hours of community service. Dale and the other 2 residents accepted similar deals with smaller fines. I wasn't present for the sentencing, but Ed attended and told me about it afterward. Apparently, Brenda's lawyer tried to make her sound sympathetic, talking about the stress of the emergency and her concern for neighbors. The judge wasn't impressed. "Miss Morrison," the judge had said, according to Ed's account, "your concern for your neighbor's welfare is admirable, but it doesn't give you the right to violate Mr. Parker's property rights. He was under no obligation to open his home to you or anyone else. The fact that you attempted to force entry, claiming some false HOA authority, shows a fundamental disrespect for the law. You're fortunate these charges are misdemeanors and not felonies." The judge also ordered Brenda to have no contact with me for the duration of her probation, which was fine by me. I never wanted to see her again. The civil side of things wrapped up around the same time. Several residents, including Ed and the Yamamotos, filed a formal complaint against the HOA for failing to prevent Brenda's harassment and attempted forced entry. The HOA's insurance company settled quickly, paying out modest amounts to avoid prolonged litigation. I received a settlement of $5,000 for the harassment and stress, which I used to buy more firewood and upgrade my wood stove system with a heat-powered fan that better circulated warm air through my house. By the summer of 2026, life in Riverside Meadows had mostly returned to normal. The neighborhood had a new board president, new treasurer, and a completely revised approach to governance. Frank ran the HOA meetings efficiently and fairly, focusing on actual community needs like road maintenance and snow removal, rather than trying to control what people did in their own homes. Several neighbors had actually followed my lead and installed wood stoves or pellet stoves of their own. Ed's setup was particularly nice, a modern pellet stove that burned compressed wood pellets and had a thermostat control. We joke about being the wood stove club, though obviously, we'd learned our lesson about the importance of emergency preparedness. The house 2 doors down from me, which had been Brenda's, sold in April to a young couple with a newborn. They were friendly and normal, and I welcomed them to the neighborhood without any of the drama that had defined the previous months. I never regretted installing my wood stove or refusing to turn my home into a public warming center. I'd helped the people I could reasonably help. I'd stood up for my rights, and I'd faced down a bully who thought she could use her HOA position to override property law. On quiet winter evenings, I'd sit in front of my wood stove with a book and a drink, listening to the fire crackle and feeling the warmth radiate through my home. The stove represented more than just heat to me now. It represented self-sufficiency, preparation, and the importance of standing your ground when you're in the right. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about HOAs, community politics, and human nature. When people are comfortable and safe, they often take those things for granted. But introduce a crisis, and you quickly see who people really are. Some, like Ed and Susan and the Yamamotos, remained reasonable and grateful for help. Others, like Brenda, revealed an entitled streak that insisted their needs superseded everyone else's rights. I also learned that preparation matters. If I hadn't installed that wood stove and stockpiled firewood, December would have been miserable for me too. My investment in self-sufficiency paid off in ways I'd never anticipated. The legal consequences Brenda faced sent a message through our community and probably beyond it. You can't just take what you want because you think you deserve it or because there's an emergency. Property rights matter, boundaries matter, and HOAs don't have unlimited power over residents' lives. As for me, I continued living in my house in Riverside Meadows, enjoying my wood stove every winter and maintaining good relationships with my actual neighbors. The wood stove that had caused so much controversy became just another normal part of the neighborhood landscape. People stopped commenting on the smoke from my chimney, probably because half a dozen other chimneys were now producing similar wisps of steam and minimal smoke. Frank, the new HOA president, actually approached me once about writing up some guidelines for emergency preparedness to distribute to residents. I agreed, and we put together a practical document about having backup heat sources, maintaining emergency supplies, and knowing where city warming centers were located. It was information that could have prevented a lot of the panic and conflict if it had existed before that December cold snap. The document included a section on wood stoves and other alternative heating systems, with information about permits, professional installation, and proper operation. It specifically noted that such systems were allowed under HOA covenants and encouraged residents to consider them as backup options. It felt like vindication, seeing the HOA officially endorse the exact thing Brenda had tried so hard to oppose. Ed told me later that Brenda had tried to fight the criminal charges initially, claiming she was being persecuted for trying to help people. Her lawyer apparently advised her that going to trial was a terrible idea given the video evidence and witness statements. The plea deal was the best outcome she could hope for, and even that left her with a criminal record and probation. I sometimes wondered if Brenda learned anything from the experience. Did she recognize that her behavior had been wrong, or did she still see herself as a victim of my selfishness? I'd never know, and honestly, I didn't care much. She'd faced legal consequences for her actions, and that was enough for me. The civil settlement I received from the HOA felt like acknowledgement that the organization itself bore some responsibility for not reining in Brenda's behavior earlier. The board should have shut down her harassment campaign after the first meeting when it was clear I wasn't violating any rules. Instead, they'd enabled her, either through active support or passive acceptance, and that failure had legal and financial consequences. Using that settlement money for wood stove improvements felt appropriate. I installed a small backup battery system so my heat-powered fan would work even during power outages. I also bought a moisture meter to ensure I was always burning properly seasoned wood, maximizing efficiency and minimizing smoke. These upgrades made my setup even better, and I enjoyed explaining them to neighbors who asked about my system. The Yamamoto family became good friends after sharing those 3 days in my house during the crisis. David and I discovered we both enjoyed woodworking, and we started a weekend project building a wooden playset for their kids. Lisa and David invited me over for dinner regularly, and their kids called me Uncle Kenneth, which I found both amusing and touching. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow I'd sheltered, became like an adopted grandmother to me. She'd bake cookies and leave them on my doorstep with little notes. I'd check on her during bad weather and help with tasks like shoveling snow or changing hard-to-reach light bulbs. She told me once that those 3 days in my house had been scary but also comforting, knowing that there were still good people willing to help their neighbors. That was the thing Brenda had never understood. Helping neighbors is something you choose to do out of compassion and community spirit, not something you're forced to do by threats and demands. I'd helped Ed and Susan, Mrs. Henderson, and the Yamamotos because they were my neighbors in need, and I had the means to help. I'd refuse to help the angry mob because they weren't asking, they were demanding, and their entitlement erased any obligation I might have felt. The whole situation also made me appreciate the legal system's protection of property rights. Without those rights, anyone could claim an emergency and force their way into your home. The judge's comments during Brenda's sentencing reflected this principle. Emergencies don't suspend constitutional rights. There were legal, appropriate ways to handle the crisis, and Brenda had ignored all of them in favor of trying to bully me into compliance. As I approached the one-year anniversary of the December crisis, I reflected on how much had changed. Riverside Meadows was a better community now, with leadership that respected residents' autonomy and focused on actual community needs. The neighborhood had learned valuable lessons about emergency preparedness and the limits of HOA authority. And I'd proven that standing up for your rights, even when pressured by a mob, was the right choice. My wood stove continued to heat my home efficiently through the winter of 2026-2027. I'd sometimes laugh remembering Brenda's insistence that I should share my heat with the entire neighborhood. The absurdity of that demand became even clearer with time and distance from the crisis. It would be like demanding someone share their car because public transportation was disrupted, or share their food because grocery stores were closed. Property rights exist specifically to prevent such demands. I also thought about how differently things might have gone if I'd given in to Brenda's initial pressure. If I'd opened my home to dozens of strangers, would it have prevented the crisis? No, probably not. It would have overwhelmed my resources, destroyed my peace and privacy, and still not solved the underlying problem that the neighborhood lacked backup heating plans. The real solution had always been the city warming centers or individual preparation, not turning my house into a homeless shelter. The Ring camera footage that proved so crucial in the criminal case remained stored on my phone as a reminder. I'd watch it occasionally, seeing Brenda's face contorted with rage as she demanded entry to my home, seeing the crowd behind her ready to follow her lead. It reminded me how quickly people could turn mob-like when they felt entitled to something, and how important it was to stand firm against such pressure. Ed and I would sometimes sit in my living room on winter evenings, both our wood stoves burning warm, and talk about that crazy December. We'd shake our heads at the absurdity of it all, Brenda trying to force me to share my heating system like it was a public utility, the angry mob on my lawn, the police having to explain basic property rights to supposed adults. "You know what the craziest part is?" Ed said once. "Half those people demanding to use your stove could have gone to the warming centers at any time. They just didn't want to. They wanted the convenience of staying in the neighborhood and felt entitled to use your resources to make that possible." He was absolutely right. The city warming centers were open, available, and free. They had space, professional staff, supplies, and backup generators. They were the appropriate response to the emergency. But Brenda and her followers had decided that using those facilities was beneath them, and my wood stove was an easier option. Their laziness and entitlement had driven the whole conflict. As summer 2026 approached, and I no longer needed the wood stove, I spent time maintaining it and preparing for the next winter. I had the chimney professionally cleaned and inspected. I inventoried my firewood supply and arranged for more deliveries in the fall. I reviewed my emergency supplies and updated anything expired or depleted. The December crisis had taught me the value of preparation, and I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable rhythm under Frank's leadership. HOA meetings became boring again, which was exactly how they should be. Discussions about landscaping contracts and snow removal schedules, not dramatic confrontations about property rights. Several residents thanked Frank privately for bringing sanity back to the board. I never saw Brenda again after she left the neighborhood. Occasionally, I'd hear through the grapevine that she was still living in Denver, working in some administrative position. Her probation would end eventually, and her criminal record would fade into background noise. But the lessons from her behavior remained relevant for everyone who'd witnessed it. The whole experience reinforced my belief in the importance of knowing your rights and standing up for them. If I'd been less informed about property law, less prepared with documentation, or less willing to fight, Brenda might have succeeded in her bullying campaign. She might have forced me to give in through social pressure, bogus fines, or sheer persistence. But I'd stood my ground, and ultimately the law had supported me. I also gained appreciation for good neighbors. Ed, Susan, the Yamamotos, Mrs. Henderson, and others who'd been reasonable and grateful throughout the crisis became my true community. We looked out for each other not because an HOA demanded it, but because we genuinely cared. That's what community actually means: voluntary mutual support among people who respect each other's boundaries and autonomy. As fall 2026 approached and I began stacking firewood for the upcoming winter, I felt satisfied with how everything had turned out. My wood stove stood ready to heat my home efficiently. My relationships with my actual neighbors were strong. The HOA had been reformed and no longer posed a threat. And Brenda faced legal consequences for her attempt to violate my rights. The wood stove that had caused so much conflict ultimately became a symbol of something important: the right to self-sufficiency, the importance of preparation, and the value of standing firm when you're in the right. Every time I lit a fire in that cast iron jottle, I remembered not just the warmth it provided, but the principles I'd defended to keep it. And when that first cold snap hit in November 2026, and I fired up my wood stove for another season, I smiled knowing that this time there would be no drama, no demands, no angry mobs on my lawn. Just the peaceful crackle of burning wood, the radiant warmth filling my home, and the satisfaction of a man who'd stood his ground and won.